Thank you, Rachel. It's great to be here, and I've managed to turn the microphone on, so that bodes well for the rest of the session here. So, what I want to talk about today is the Platte River program. A little bit of background. Many of you have familiarity with that background, but some of you may not. Fill you in on where we're at in those things that we were tasked with accomplishing, focusing on some unique aspects regarding the governance structure of the program. Spent a little time on adaptive management, but given that this is a water seminar, a good chunk of time on what we're doing on the water front. So let's get going. So, Platte River Recovery Implementation Program. That's a long title, but this is the Platte River, and the area that is outlined in blue is the umbrella that is covered by the program. So the entirety of the North Platte Basin, the entirety of the South Platte Basin to the headwaters, and the main stem of the Platte to its confluence with the loop. In particular, our actions occur in the Lexington to Chapman, or the associated habitat area, in the Big Bend Reach area. We also have an interest in the lower Platte, associated with the fish. Our actions in the Big Bend Reach are mostly associated with, are entirely associated with the birds. And there are the target species. That is what we are trying to recover. So the whooping crane that migrates through the Central Platte twice a year in the spring and the fall between their wintering and summering grounds. The interior lease tern, the piping plover, two sort of robin-sized species that migrate to the Central Platte, amongst other areas, but to the Central Platte to nest and fledge their young, and then the pallid sturgeon in the lower Platte. And by doing what we do to work towards the recovery of the threatened and endangered species, we provide Endangered Species Act compliance for the water users of the basin. So, the municipalities along the Front Range in Colorado, agriculture in all of the states, recreational water users in all of the states, by providing Endangered Species Act compliance, it largely means life can continue as we know it. The apple cart doesn't get upset. We all don't have to pack up and get on boats and go back to wherever we came from and return it to a Buffalo Commons kind of state. Just to exaggerate there, but it provides coverage for any of the development activities that had occurred and a framework for activities that will occur in the future. So how are we going to recover those species? Well, it is through rehabilitation, restoration of habitat. And what we mean by that is illustrated by these two photographs. This is the area of the Platte near Lexington in 1938. Very broad, a lot of bare sand, no vegetation between the high banks. 60 years later, that same location, vegetation has encroached, the channel's shrunk to a narrow ribbon. So our activities are oriented in the associated habitat reach of turning chunks of the river to make it look more like that than that. And by creating the habitat for the species, help expand their numbers. So the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program is a collaborative program. So touch a little bit on the governance structure and the basic organization and structure of the program. And amongst all of the recovery programs that exist, and there are a number of them, the Platte River program is unique in that it is not a federal program, it is a collaborative program. And why is that so? Well, for one thing, the costs are split 50-50, so between the states and the federal government. So if you count cash and in-kind contributions of land and water, half comes from the federal government, half comes from the states. And most of the cash comes from the federal government, but the states provide a combination of cash, land, and water. Another reason it is collaborative is that the governance structure. All of the parties, all of the stakeholders in the basin are at the table, and that so there are 2 Department of Interior federal entities. There are the 3 states, Nebraska, Colorado, and Wyoming. They're represented, but also at the table are water users and environmental and conservation groups. And as long as they're at that table, everyone has a voice, everyone has a vote. It's a little bit like Animal Farm in that all animals are created equal, but in reality some are a little bit more equal. But with respect to having a vote and moving forward by consensus, things are quite equal in that regard. The next aspect that makes it collaborative is independent in implementation. So in federal programs, the role of executive director and program staff is filled by a federal employee. So whatever the lead federal agency is, an employee of that agency is the executive director, or a similar title, responsible for the implementation of the program, the day-to-day operations. But in the Platte, they wanted a different approach. They said if this is going to be collaborative, no one at the table can be responsible for the day-to-day implementation. It's just, it violates the fundamental premise of trust and equality if someone serves that role that also sits at that table. What we need is an independent executive director so that they can serve as an honest broker. They don't have a dog in the fight. They implement, they develop information, they bring information back for the decision makers to make those decisions, but they are fair and unbiased. Related to the independent implementation, there are some other entities that needed to be created. We needed a financial management entity to hold contracts and serve as the bank, and that's the Nebraska Community Foundation. And we needed an entity that would actually hold title to the land that we bought, and a 501c3 was created to serve that function. So independent implementation is a critical underpinning of the program, making it truly collaborative and not federal. The final aspect of governance and structure is the process integrity of independent science. And we have a number of advisory committees, but amongst those is an independent science advisory committee, and that's composed of 6 individuals, they're subject matter experts that otherwise have no connection with the program. Their function is twofold. One, to confirm that we're doing things right, that we are following appropriate procedures and methodologies, and doing the analysis correctly and making reasonable interpretations and synthesis from those analyses. And secondly, to make sure we're doing the right things. So if you're trying to answer this question and you're doing these things, will those things lead you to an actual answer to that question, or are you overlooking something? Are you not gathering enough information? Are you answering a different question than what you think you're answering? So we have that, and in addition, any document that has management implications must be peer reviewed, either through publication in an independent peer reviewed journal or through a peer review panel assembled by the program. And in the assembly of peer review panels and the independent science advisory committees, a third-party independent contractor develops the list of candidates. They're vetted by the executive director's office and the appropriate advisory committee, and then that is taken forward for final approval by the governance committee. So at every level, an extraordinary effort is made to make sure that the science is good and the science is independent. And that is critically important because important decisions, big decisions with profound implications are made based upon that information. It has to be credible. It has to be accepted by everyone around the table. So there are three major components of the program. The land and water and the adaptive management. So we are to acquire land, we are to acquire water, and the adaptive management is the science part to make sure that we are using the land and water resources to the best advantage of the species, that we're using it appropriately. And it's adaptive management because we are learning by doing. We don't know everything that we need to, so we're doing science to learn and improve. So let me sort of walk through what each of those components are and where we're at in the process. So on the land plan, the mission there was to acquire, protect, and restore 10,000 acres of habitat for the three bird species in the Central Platte. Key concepts that underline that the land plan was that it be a willing seller, willing buyer operation. So we can only buy what people are willing to sell to us. You know, we don't have eminent domain. We can't condemn. We can't take. We pay property taxes. So any land we acquire, we pay taxes on that. We don't disrupt the tax base of the counties that we are in. We follow a good neighbor policy, which is pretty much what it says. We try to be good neighbors. And to the degree possible, we open our lands up for public access. But we do it in a controlled fashion so that the primary benefit to the species is not diminished by the opportunity for people to use those lands for recreation, hunting, fishing, hiking, bird watching, that sort of activity. So in that Lexington to Chapman reach, the areas shown there in green are other conservation lands. The orange outlines are the properties that we've acquired. Our goal was 10,000. Right now we stand at 12,000. So there were a number of milestones that we needed to check the box on as we worked over the first increment, which we started in 2007. The first increment that people have agreed to is 13 years, so December 31st, 2019, you know, our charter expires. In that time, we were supposed to acquire 10,000 acres. We stand at 12, so that box got checked. And as you can see, we try to acquire land in primarily in blocks, complexes, so that there is sufficient land there to create meaningful, useful habitat for the species. So In sharp contrast to the glowing success that we had on the land plan, let me now talk about the water plan. Things are not going as well there, and I'll get into that. What the objective there was to reduce deficits to target flows by 130 to 150,000 acre-feet a year, and the average flow at Grand Island's on the order of 1 million acre-feet, so that's a big chunk of water. And that was to come in basically kind of two categories. When the states anteed into this agreement, they brought water with them. And the three initial projects from Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska are listed there. But the program had the responsibility of developing the rest. So the three states' contributions, in the case of Nebraska, was the environmental account in Lake McConaughey. So 100,000 acres, guaranteed storage, and 10% of the non-irrigation season natural inflow to McConaughey. Nebraska's contribution, Wyoming's, they modified Pathfinder Reservoir, and we got a portion of the yield from that recovered storage. And in Colorado, they did a retiming through groundwater project, the Tamarack project. You add the contributions of all those up, and you got 80,000 acre-feet. So 50 to 70 is the remainder to be acquired. So, and it's measured against target flow. So let me explain that. So on this graph, so we've got flow in cubic feet per second there, and daily, average daily flow. And we got time on the bottom, so January, February, so on. These black boxy lines are what the Fish and Wildlife Service said, that's the flow that you need in the river for the benefit of the species. If you look at the blue line, that's an average representation of the present conditions. If you look at the red line, that's if we accomplish what we're supposed to accomplish in terms of the water plan, that's what the hydrograph could look like. So more flow in the river at the times that it's considered to be beneficial for the species. So if you notice here in January, February, the blue line is actually above the red line. So that brings us to retiming, which, how are we going to get the water? Well, the first is retiming. Take water that's already in the river, just not at a time that's considered beneficial to the species. If you can capture it, store it, and release it subsequently, that counts. Or we can lease or purchase water from someone who's using it for something else, so agriculture. We acquire that water and put that back in the river, that counts. And there's a third mechanism actually as well. And that's water management incentives, which is if you can reduce the consumptive use and get that reduced consumptive use to the river, that counts too. Our efforts have been focused on retiming and acquisition. We haven't ignored this. This is just harder to quantify. This probably actually represents a larger pool of water, but that, given the difficulties of quantification and institutional complications, since it's a newer way of thinking about water, that's probably down the road. But we haven't forgotten about it, and are still probing the edges of that. But let's start with a project that was in the retiming category, and that was the J2 regulating reservoir. So that was, the Central Nebraska Public Power and Irrigation District diverts water from the Platte near North Platte, brings it through the supply canal, generates hydropower at a number of places, but after the last hydropower location, if it's not taken on down for irrigation, it's returned to the river. The concept was Well, the water that was be returned to the river at times when it's not needed in the river, it's in excess of target flows. Let's put it in a regulating reservoir and retime it there. And that project, you know, of the 50 to 70, that was going to provide the program in excess of 30,000 and 10,000 to the state of Nebraska, which also has some water obligations. But that ran into escalating costs, land acquisition issues, institutional difficulties. That went on hold this last year. So, you know, it's not dead. It's just sort of in a medically induced coma at this point. In the meantime, we'd also been developing water leases. So we had Lease from Wyoming, developed leases with Central Platte, CNPPID, and PPD. And we're continuing to develop those as well. But with the retiming, the re-regulation concept, well, with J2 on hold, there's still that retime water that can be capitalized on. We just have to find a different way of retiming it and storing it. So we did a hard pivot, and we are looking at two concepts to accomplish that. One is the broad scale recharge, which is, okay, we take water from let's say a canal. We put it over a large basin, infiltrated. It gets back to the river by wending its way through the aquifer, or we put in recapture wells and put it in. Now, we've been doing recharge under those lease agreements with a number of those entities, but that was utilizing their existing canal systems to, in the non-irrigation season, recharge water when there were times of excess and non-icing issues in those systems. This is expanding that concept and taking large areas, hundreds of acres, putting water on that, recharging it in that fashion. The other concept we're working on is rather than building a reservoir in the typical build a dike or build an embankment kind of concept, as we're doing explorations, there is a impervious layer, depending on where you're at, and particularly west of Elm Creek and all the way to Lexington, an impervious layer. Well, basically it's the capstone on top of the Ogallala, and it's down anywhere from 20 to 80 feet. It's anywhere from 10 to 20 feet thick. It's very low permeability. So if we could put slurry walls around, say, like an old gravel pit, the water you put in is not going anywhere. It's a storage vessel as well. So those are the two retiming concepts. We're scouring the area largely between Elm Creek and Gothenburg for opportunities for that. And we already own a chunk of land in that reach. So at the Cottonwood Ranch complex, we are in the process of developing a broad-scale recharge project there. We're about ready to make a selection for a consultant to take us into design, and hopefully very soon we'll be into construction of that. We own property on Elm Creek, Elm Creek complex that has potential. We have acquired some additional property specifically for water plan in the reach between Cottonwood Ranch and Elm Creek, and then up near Lexington, some of the properties we already own. So one way to solve the land acquisition dilemma that we faced at J2 was, well, we already own some land, what can we do with that? And in particular, the broad-scale recharge that will be implemented here, it will be implemented on lands acquired for habitat, and in fact, by flooding large areas to shallow depths in the spring and fall, it creates and enhances the whooping crane habitat potential of that land. So it's actually a beneficial win-win. And a conceptual design of how that would work, small retaining type structures to impede it less than 6 feet tall at the max, and a total of 400 to 500 acres flooded to shallow depths. So we're a little bit farther along with that concept. We have advanced the slurry wall concept, and really key to that is that impeding layer on the bottom. Now, slurry wall technology is not new. It's been used extensively for water storage in Colorado, but when they talk about bedrock, they got bedrock there. I mean, it's solid rock. So, will it work here? How extensive is that impermeable layer in our area? And I'll get to, we have a better idea of that. But, I just am tickled at this picture. It's like, it's a ditch witch on steroids, but that's how you construct the trench that you develop the slurry wall in. It's a well-proven technique in other areas. So, okay, so the question, how extensive, where is that impeding layer, how extensive is it? So we hired anybody with a drill rig in that part of the world and had them punch a bunch of holes, and we also talked to and hired people that had high-tech techniques, which is aerial electromagnetic surveys, which is you hang an instrument below a helicopter and you go flying over the countryside, and it sends electromagnetic pulses into the subsurface, and you can go down actually much deeper than we needed to explore. And oops. Before it's through, I'll manage to, explode the computer, or so screw up the slideshow, it'll be irretrievable. So the answer is, it's quite extensive, and it's not necessarily continuous under that entire area, but it is continuous over areas of 160 to 300 acres. So absolutely continuous enough in the areas that we've tested to support the slurry wall, to provide the base for a slurry wall storage unit. And it's thick enough to trench into it so that you can key into it and get a watertight seal, or so we believe. Now, hopefully, we'll test that with a pilot project. We'll be seeking authorization to do that from our governance committee next week. But it's a well-proven technology, but it's never been done in central Nebraska. We're hoping for a lot of water from that approach. We want to make sure it works before we get too far down the road and have to take another sharp pivot. So back to water leases. So in some cases, what we're leasing is these entities are either leasing a surface water. In the case of Wyoming, they anteed some water in from Pathfinder, but they kept some for themselves for municipal uses, which they don't need. So they're leasing it to us. We are leasing water from CMPPID. We are operating some recharge projects with them as well. And similarly with Central Platte NRD and the Nebraska Public District. So it's either recharge of excess flows or surface water that was used for irrigation that's relinquished and now available for transfer for use, environmental purposes in the river. But the key thing is that we have a lease agreement of some form with every irrigation system on the Platte River between North Platte and Elm Creek, and there's the opportunity to expand those into additional waters. And those are on a district to, entity to entity. So it's an agreement between the program and Central Platte NRD or CNPPID. But we are also exploring two water markets, water lease arrangements with individual users. With CNPPID, a surface water market, where they can lease the water to us for a year. They must convert it to a dry land. There is a preset price. They can agree to it or not. We're in the second year of a pilot project there, and some actual encouraging results from developing water supply from that market. There's also a groundwater market from Central Platte NRD. That's groundwater. Again, it's a one-year lease, must convert to a dry land. It's more of an auction kind of format. And we've been less successful there. We did, the first year we got no water. The second year we did get a little water. This market is really oriented more towards farmer-to-farmer transfers as opposed to agriculture to the river. So stay tuned. We'll see what develops on those fronts. So at any rate, so land, check the box. Water, right now in hand, all of these things, we have got on the order of 10,000 acre feet. So we've got a long ways to go. And it is clear at this point we have not met, nor will we meet by 2019 the water plan. So I'll talk about what that means for the path forward, but I guess over-appropriated basin in a semi-arid region was a pretty good clue that water was going to be hard. But and I can't even say no one knew how complicated water was going to be. Yeah, we knew it was going to be hard. It just turned out to be even harder than we thought. But we've actually made great progress in a lot of respects, and there is a well-developed plan for moving forward. So hope springs eternal. Let me move on to adaptive management. Yeah, and what we're trying to do on land and water is, that's clear enough. By land, restore habitat, get water, put water in the river at the time that it's of benefit to the species. Now, the adaptive management, the goals there were increase numbers, improve production, and very wisely, because our habitat is only a portion of the habitat necessary for the survival of the species, our goals are not tied strictly to numerical, you know, you've got to get this many whooping cranes or you need this many terns and plovers. It's improve. But this is the science side of things. So adaptive management, you know, the key things there is that it allows you to move forward in the face of uncertainty. We don't know everything we need to know. We don't agree on a number of things that we think we know. But it's a systematic, rigorous process where you develop a hypothesis and you test it and you apply that information to improve how you are managing the land and water resources for the benefit of the species. And we are our adaptive management program is very focused. It has to be tied to a management action. So if it's not something that we control, we don't spend a great deal of time learning about it. So our focus is, you know, tied to management action. Does that management action produce a change in the physical system, and is that physical system tangibly tied to a benefit to the species? So it's kind of a three steps in that process, and shown there is the adaptive management cycle: adjust, assess, design, implement, monitor, and evaluate. Or actually assess, design, implement, monitor, evaluate, and then the adjust is the hard part. And I'll touch on that in a bit here. But okay, so we do science, we do experiments, and this is how we do science. So this is a location on our complex near Overton. So in February 2010, a bunch of trees got cleared and a plan for an off-channel sand and water complex was developed. And then you get big yellow machines in to move dirt around, and then 3 years later, you've got islands in the river and you've got an off-channel sand and water complex, so that you can answer questions about, will the birds use these? Will they use that? Will they use these more? What are the productivity rates? Are these more productive than that? Or what's more beneficial? And we collect data of quite a range. So we collect physical process data: hydrology, stream flow, topography, geomorphology, sediment data, bed characteristics, vegetation, as well as the species. What do they use? In case of the tern and plover, how many nests? What was their productivity? How many fledged? A mountain of data, and for the UNL faculty and other faculty, we're sitting on mounds of data that we analyze and synthesize to answer the questions we need, but it's there to answer other questions in mind for a lot of other things that aren't essential to our mission, so we haven't mined it as completely as it could be mined. So and we're happy to collaborate with people. You don't have to be interested in a question that we're interested in. If our data or our facilities could be useful, we're happy to collaborate with you on making that data available or allowing access to our laboratory, which stretches over 90 miles and consists of in excess of 12,000 acres. So a valuable resource. So we have a number of hypotheses, but we've kind of consolidated it for ease of conceptualizing and communication into some big questions. So let me just look at the first big question. Will implementation of the short duration high flow, which is 5,000 to 8,000 CFS in the habitat reach for 3 to 5 days, 2 out of 3 years, produce suitable tern and plover riverine nesting habitat on an annual or near annual basis? So then, there are about a dozen big questions. So to communicate you know, the answer, as we answer the question, we have adopted these icons. So one thumb down or one thumb up. You know, a thumb down is the evidence is trending. The answer is no. One thumb up, the evidence is trending. The answer is yes. And when we are through, you know, when we get it through to a peer review and are confident about the answer, we can move to a 2 thumbs down or a 2 thumbs up. And then there's the scratchy head guy, which is, yeah, we don't know. I advocate for a 2 scratchy head guy, which means we're even more confused now than we were when we started, but that is not widely embraced. So notice on number 1, we have moved to a 2 thumbs down. Will SDHF produce a suitable term plover habitat? And the answer is no. No, it won't. So before I follow on that trail, I just want to, you know, emphasize the communication in the science sphere is critical to, you know, get the information into useful forms, get it distributed, and the, you know, and the process of developing it. So there are many levels, and it's important that good communication occurs between levels, across levels, and it's also important to understand that science informs decisions, but the governance committee makes the decisions, and that mantra I have to repeat often to the science contractors and science people, which, you know, you may have great information, you may have developed an answer, but the decision makers decide what to do with that information. And that really emphasizes the importance of the honest broker role of communicating the information in a meaningful manner so that the decision makers understand what's being presented, the level of certainty or uncertainty associated with it. But there are a lot of factors they consider, and they make their decisions considering science, but considering other things as well. So back to the diagram. So on big question number 1, we got to the answer, which, you know, great, but now comes the adjust. So that's not going to work. What do we do next? So we implemented a structured decision-making process, so which involves, you know, the getting the decision makers together in rooms and going through a rigorous methodical process, which is, I mean, it's not unique. It's, you know, how smart people make decisions. It's how you people make decisions in everyday life. You know, it's like, so you develop alternatives. That won't work. Here's a bunch of other things we could try. And then you figure out how you want to measure those things. So then you go, you look at your data, you develop models, you do analysis, you quantify the metrics that you've determined to be important in evaluating those. You put them together in big tables, and you compare alternatives, and you talk about it, and then you decide you didn't have enough alternatives, so you cycle back through. And we did that. And on June last year at our governance committee meeting, we made a policy level adjustment in response to, that's not going to work, this is what we're going to do moving forward. And as far as we know, as far as we can determine, in all of the river restoration or all of the recovery programs across the nation, that's the first time that's actually been accomplished. I mean, they've done tremendous jobs on this part. There are mounds of information and analysis and reports. But as far as we can determine, no one has ever actually adjusted and changed what they've done based upon what we've learned. So that's kind of deep into the wonky dork forest of things, but we're pretty proud of that. All right, so let me wrap it up here. So check the boxes on the science side, adaptive management side. So there were 10 milestones. We met all of them except 2, and those were related to water. Program didn't get the water they needed, and the state of Nebraska, because a lot of our projects, they were a part of the J2. When that went down, they apparently are not going to meet their goal either. There's the opportunity, they might pull a Hail Mary out and meet theirs, but it's clear we're not going to meet ours. So what do? Declare failure, pull the plug, or alternatively, because so much had been accomplished, people were pleased with the process, and understanding that water is harder than originally conceived, but we're making good progress. So let's stay the course. Yeah, let's look. Yeah, let's extend the first increment. It's going to take a little bit more money. Water's more expensive than anticipated, and it's going to take more time. And we'll have some funds left over that hopefully we'll get to roll forward. But even with that, we'll need about $106 million additional dollars. We spent a good chunk of last year working out the agreement for moving forward at the governance committee level. There were some adjustments since we've got more time. In addition to the 12,000 acres we already have, the Fish and Wildlife Service really wanted another complex in a bridge segment that we didn't have one, so let's get 1,500 acres of additional habitat. And a major concession from the Fish and Wildlife Service and the environmental community was, that water's really quite expensive, and we were talking about 130 to 150, but as we look at what it's going to take to get from 120 to 130, that's a lot of money. So let's do this. Let's get to 120,000 acre feet. So the 3 states have already brought 80,000 to the table. We've got 10 already, so we need 30,000 additional to get to 120,000 acre feet. But let's do the science and test whether that's enough. And everybody commits that if the science says that's not enough, they'll do everything in their power to get that additional money so that we can get that additional chunk of water. So there's agreement in terms of concept and words and a proposal at the governance committee level. There's still some arm wrestling as to, okay, if the number's 106, who pays what? Hopefully that'll get resolved. And those discussions are going on above my pay grade, so hopefully they'll get resolved reasonably soon. And with that, then need to update some environmental documents. Not a major update because we're just taking more time to do what we said we were going to do anyway. And probably the bigger challenge is, okay, we got to get this approved. We've got to get it signed by the 3 governors. We need congressional authorization for the extension. So we're talking about another 13 years, so to 2032, some additional funds. We're optimistic about that last step, but that's certainly not a slam dunk given today's climate and budget issues amongst all the states and at the federal level. So go to our website. There's a wealth of information on that, and that's my story. Some time for questions. Thank you.
Great. I see Donna has a question. First one. Two, okay.
Does the executive directive issued 2 evenings ago regarding the waters of the U.S. have any impact whatsoever on this collaborative effort? And number 2, and you started to allude to it at the end of your delivery, as I've watched the members of all 3 states' congressional delegations move dramatically to the right on the political spectrum, how do you conclude that you're going to be able to lift the next increment in Congress?
Okay, so yeah, the first part of that was waters of the U.S. What's the impact? You know, the new rules. What impact does that have on the program? And the program has to play by the same rules with respect to the Corps of Engineers and 404 permits. Anything that makes that, you know, more rigorous or difficult just adds time to our processes. But we don't get special breaks because we're doing and or.
All of the regulatory pressures that have been staring at me since the early 70s are weakened or removed, I have far less incentive to put your phone number on my automatic dialer, particularly if there's an intergenerational transfer of land coming up in the next decade. I don't view this project as nearly as relevant if those regulations are no longer at the forefront of my operation. That was the reason I asked the question.
Well, yeah, with regard to that, if they repeal the Endangered Species Act, there's no need for us. We exist, you know, strictly for the Endangered Species Act. I think, you know, in terms of interactions with the community, at least with respect to the acquisition of land or water, that's really driven more by commodity prices than fear of the regulatory environment. So so probably not as much as as one might think on that front. With regard to sort of the movement to the right, you know, certainly, you know, with this administration over the past 8 years, why in God's name would we be optimistic that we can get anything through Congress, specifically, you know, particularly something that is environmentally oriented? Well, the reason for that is this program is different than all the others. So there's a little bit of something in it for everybody on the political spectrum. So if you're, you know, if you love the critters, working towards the recovery of that, obviously you like it. It is a different governance structure. So it is not federal. This is more grassroots. This is a great deal of local control. So that resonates well with, you know, the more conservative elements. You know, it represents an approach in line with a more conservative mindset of, you know, it's not big government. It is people working together to solve problems. The fact that we've been able to accomplish as much as we have, as cost effectively as we have, speaks well, you know, across political lines. So those are the basis for a degree of optimism that it is effectively implementing the Endangered Species Act in a manner that is not as onerous as other enforcements in other areas. So I am heartened by the Family Farm Alliance cites this program as an example of a case where there can be an effective implementation of the Endangered Species Act without onerous burden to agriculture and the disruption of the setting. So we're going to give it a go, and we'll see.
Couple quick questions. What's been the progress on the recovery of the terns and plovers in numbers, and what has your data shown in relation to the success rate in the river in contrast to the complexes, the sand pit that you developed?
So, and again, our goals are not tied to specific numbers, but decisions are made based upon, on the data collected. So, productivity on the off-channel sand and water complexes is much higher than in the river. And actually, the big question that we answered, will that SDHF regime create the kind of habitat? And the answer to that is no. Is tied to the numbers of the numbers associated with birds on the river. The reason that, and the answer is productivity is lower on the islands, in that it is subjected to more of the vagaries of nature. A sudden high flow, which is virtually guaranteed in the Central Platte, if not from a localized thunderstorm that produces tributary inflow, or a rain, which means that the irrigation water isn't needed and it's dumped back in the river, will flood out and destroy the nests or the fledglings. So overall, it is clear the more off-channel sand and water, the larger the number of birds that are in the Central Platte, both tern and plover, that are there. It's a clear trend. The more habitat we create, the more birds we get. So, and so the focus, the answer to the question of what do we do? Well, we are focusing much more on off-channel sand and water. So we're going to add more of that. We're not going to abandon islands in the river entirely. We basically still need to check against that, but we are not going to spend large amounts of resources building those islands. They will be created more in association with habitat rehabilitation, just kind of clearing islands that already exist, as opposed to building them or taking heroic efforts. And overall, the terns are in the process of being delisted. So, and that's not just to numbers in the Central Platte, but nationwide. They are in the process of being delisted. Plovers, not so, and pretty much anything you do that will help a plover is a benefit to the terns. So we'll keep collecting that data, but progress.
Very good. Thank you so much. And are you able to stick around and ask if
Yes,
people visit?
and at 5 o'clock I'm getting together with soil and water students. So
Very good.
They will find me,
Very
hopefully,
good.
here.
You're going to stick around a long time.
Well, thank you.
Very much.